Welcome to Game Data. This week we're taking a look at the 2021 MacBook Pro with M1 Pro. Now, if you asked me for thoughts on MacBooks years ago, I would have told you that they're overpriced, underpowered laptops mostly fit for people who either have a niche use case or didn't want to bother thinking about price to performance ratios. There's still a nugget of truth in that sentiment today, and I can't stress enough that Apple's walled garden filled with an ecosystem of sometimes lackluster devices isn't necessarily one I'd recommend building a house in, if at all possible. However, MacBooks in particular have undergone a sort of renaissance in the past year. Sporting a cutting-edge chip design and a reversal on some of Apple's anti-consumer practices, these devices might warrant visiting the walled garden to check out. But hold on, before you go ordering anything, there are more than a few caveats to consider, whether you're upgrading from an old Intel MacBook or functional non-macOS laptop. There are some real bright sides to this computer, but many of them have some really dark shadows, which may be deal breakers for some people. In this video, I'm going to go over this device's strengths, weaknesses for basic use cases, as well as why I even bought it in the first place. Our next video will then focus harder on how well this MacBook Pro keeps up with professional tasks. If you're interested in any topic in particular, go ahead and check out the chapters we've created to skip to exactly what you came here to see. Okay, with that out of the way, let's get started. First up, let's look at my specific use case as for why I even have this thing. Right now, I need a laptop that won't implode while I'm writing scripts, doing initial video edits, or doing some general design work. That work requires a quality screen and a halfway decent CPU-GPU combo. For anything too intense, we do have our desktop, which has proven more than capable by itself. So, while I could dump funds into a full-on desktop replacement with limited battery life, I'd prioritize having something much more portable that can last a while on a single charge. Coming from a Dell XPS 15, I'm also really conscious of heat. You see, my XPS is pretty great on paper, at least for a machine from 2018, but its body gets really hot and its fans are really loud. No joke, even if I'm only using it to type on Word with the fans set to quiet, the fans sound like they're running full blast. That's severely hampered the laptop's overall performance over the past couple years and likely contributed to the current 2-hour battery life it has. Given this context, the new MacBook Pro seemed like a decent fit. Reviews peg it as decently powerful with a great mini LED display and surprisingly long battery life. And while my $2,700 configuration is a bit pricey, it's also not that much more expensive than other laptops I would typically look at, like a spec'd out Dell XPS 15 or Surface Laptop Studio. Real talk though, choosing the MacBook isn't all sunshine though. That high price tag weirdly comes with half the RAM compared to other options and non-existent future expandability options. Not to mention, I didn't have a ton of experience with macOS before buying it, so right off the bat, there are some clear downsides to choosing this MacBook Pro. I'm willing to take that hit right now because I'm overall interested in Apple's new architecture, and the computer is mostly what I'd wanted out of a new laptop, but it's clear that, on paper at least, Apple's still not the most cost-effective route to go. But, oh man, it's really hard to hate on that cost-effectiveness too much while actually holding this device. It's an extremely solid all-metal design that gives me flashbacks in the best way possible to the feel of my Surface Book 1. That premium feel also, thankfully, doesn't cut back on the ports. Although I'd really love a network port, it's roughly the same types of ports here that I'm used to on my XPS 15. Anything less would have honestly been a deal breaker though. Beyond connectivity, The trackpad is also fairly impressive. Its sheer size feels great for general navigation and contributes to gestures feeling more comfortable than the smaller Windows Precision trackpads used by the competition. The keyboard also feels really great to type on. Not the greatest feeling keyboard I've ever used, but beyond comfortable and roomy nonetheless. The real downside is the layout, which I'm still not entirely used to after a month of constant usage. I'm willing to chalk it up to my lack of familiarity with Mac layouts, but I'm constantly wanting for dedicated home and delete keys. Yeah, there are keyboard shortcuts to do the same functions, but I'd much rather have home and end as the second layer of my function keys instead of playback controls, which I have no use for. Beyond those quirks, I'm really appreciating the speakers and screen. Speakers are clear and incredibly loud. Making them great to use while editing videos. Likewise, that 16-inch display is easily the brightest laptop screen I've ever used, and any image or video I pull up looks just about as good as it possibly could. The one obvious hitch here is that notch. Other reviewers reported that it wasn't noticeable after a while, and yeah, I feel the same way. It's never really gotten in my way and disappears completely when viewing Windows full screen. I do wish there was an actually good reason for that notch though. The webcam still isn't very good. I mean, it's certainly passable in a pinch for video calls, but definitely not as high quality as it could be, especially for the real estate dedicated to it. On a brighter note, at least you'll sound decent while looking like a potato. The built-in microphones sound great. Whether for video calls or making quick recordings, I think most people will be satisfied with the results. I definitely am. So, it looks good, sounds good, great. Looks mean nothing though if they don't match performance. And that's where things can be a bit complex. First up, let's talk about the basics. If you were to get this laptop and mostly use it for low intensity tasks like browsing Twitter or typing a 3,000 word essay as to why the Wii U is still great, I think you'll be beyond happy. A 16-inch screen feels nice and roomy for handling multiple tasks at once or doing one thing really closely. Streaming video and games also look fantastic with the wide color range of the display. Plus, the added bonus of a 120Hz variable refresh rate is also nice to have to make those macOS animations super fluid. Although, it's worth noting that outside gaming, high refresh rates aren't a must-have. Most of the time, it's also to the computer's benefit to turn down the rate to something really low to conserve battery. Even with all the bells and whistles enabled though, you're bound to get probably the best battery life of any laptop I've used so far. Without pushing the performance of this machine, I've been able to go multiple days without charging it. A minimum 10 hours of usage hasn't been unusual, and I wouldn't doubt that even more time could be eked out if you turn down the screen brightness and kept the low power mode enabled. That's fantastic for folks like me who like to get out every once in a while and work without needing to constantly sit next to an outlet. Like the other week, Emily and I camped out at a Starbucks for a few hours to work on scripts, and it took about 2.5 hours for the laptop to go from 95% to 80%. Pretty damn impressive. Having heavier applications open, like Photoshop or Illustrator, undoubtedly will drain the battery quicker, but basic photo editing or sketching doesn't tax the system too much anyway. While not overly complex, my sessions working on new game cartridge graphics in Illustrator were as smooth as the time I spent typing in Word. Now, any reasonably powerful laptop will have an easy time with that, but it's good to note nonetheless. Not to mention the spaciousness of the trackpad left me less desperate for an external mouse while moving objects around my canvas. Although, I gotta say, the lack of touchscreen here kinda sucks. No matter how good the trackpad is, nothing quite compares to being able to reach up and zoom, scale, and rotate my canvas. I know Apple has a thing about keeping their iPad and Mac products at arm's length from each other, but I really hope that they give in and merge the two products one day. One extra area where I have some anxiety is with the memory. To be clear, 16 gigabytes in this laptop is more than enough for basic everyday tasks, but I've noticed simple services taking up more RAM than expected. For example, I use OneDrive to stash general files and assets for use between computers, and Activity Monitor reports it is occupying up to 2.5 gigabytes of RAM at a time. On other computers, even while syncing lots of files, it typically never exceeds 500 megabytes. Googling M1 MacBook memory leak will show similar problems appearing to be frequent for others who bought these laptops. While I haven't noticed any slowdowns related to memory availability, there's no way this issue isn't leaving performance on the table. Given how stingy Apple is with memory in general, it also leaves a bad taste in my mouth that their own lack of optimization causes less memory overall to be usable. The memory problem also seems to be in part because the App Store version of OneDrive isn't optimized for M1 Macs. Other unoptimized services and apps relying heavily on Rosetta to make them compatible are bound to also be more resource intensive. Many available apps are optimized for M1 already, but every time I run into one that isn't optimized, I do feel a hit to overall performance. Memory issues aside, this thing's eerily quiet while handling normal everyday tasks. With most laptops, I'm used to hearing a fan kick in at some point and hot air bursting out of the sides of the machine because Edge looked at it the wrong way, or something like that. Here, it's hard to tell if anything's running at all. Even when I forcefully ran the machine at a sustained load of 100% CPU usage, I kept doubting whether I was hearing the fan running or the gentle hum of the other machines also running in the same room. Trust me, when used for intense tasks for long periods of time, this laptop can get plenty hot. However, anyone using this for basic low-impact tasks will likely only experience a cool laptop chassis and may never even hear the fan at all. Given the relationship between heat and degradation of hardware, that could also mean an even longer overall lifespan for this device. That is, as long as the memory doesn't fail before everything else. As a final point in this video, I wanted to briefly touch on gaming. In our second video, I'll go a bit more in depth, but it didn't feel right to not talk about it at all here. By the way, I'll have a link above for that video when that exists outside of a Word document. Get subscribed so you don't miss it. But in keeping with the theme of other topics we've discussed today, basic gaming works just fine. You're still probably better with a Windows laptop if you plan to play a lot of games, but services like xCloud and Stadia are still streamable from web browsers, and Steam Link is here if you have a more powerful PC to remote into. Plus, lower impact games will definitely play fine via Steam, even with this base model. From personal experience, the M1 Pro's GPU is fairly performant for an integrated GPU as well. Throwing more money at the laptop to get an M1 Max instead would probably even fare better. The biggest downfall to worry about is really compatibility. macOS inherently has an app compatibility issue all over the place for really niche products. As someone who uses Windows in almost every aspect of his life, not having access to Notepad++, Visual Studio Code, or Power BI kinda sucks. That sentiment carries well into Steam, and not just because some developers only build their games for Windows. It's been a few years since Apple made the awkward decision to unilaterally axe compatibility with 32-bit apps. In an ideal world, all apps and games would be available in 64-bit forms, but the reality is that Apple's decision means that a lot of older games just can't be downloaded because they're 32-bit only. Many newer games should fare better, and more than a few heavy hitters appear to be macOS compatible. However, you're bound to eventually run into a roadblock with incompatible games. For those games, your only option to run them natively is to use an expensive program like Parallels to emulate Windows. Essentially, this means you'll want to do some research before buying an M1 laptop if you really need your laptop to be a gaming machine. The same very much goes for emulation. There are the venerable classics like Dolphin and OpenEMU to choose from to handle most older systems. I've played around with them a bit and they work about as well as expected. Newer systems won't be so kind though. Emulators like Cemu, Yuzu, or RPC S3 don't have versions available for macOS due to various compatibility issues. Other emulators like Citra may even only be available through either the Rosetta compatibility layer or rebuilding the app for M1. Folks who are into emulating, who've used macOS for a while, are probably like, duh, everyone knows that. But legitimately, as mostly an Android emulation enthusiast, I had no clue and was a bit bummed out not to have those options to play with. On paper, the M1 Pro seems more than capable to remake MacBooks into lightweight gaming machines, but until compatibility issues are fixed, they just can't seem to get it right here. To summarize everything so far, this is an extremely nice computer. Unless you push it really hard, it'll likely be the quietest fan-equipped laptop you've ever used, with an impressively long battery life to boot. The screen is gorgeous, the ports are plentiful, and the design feels remarkably premium. Outside some personal qualms with the screen notch and the keyboard layout, I've really enjoyed using this machine for the tasks I've thrown at it over the past month or so. As long as you don't specifically need a laptop to play games and can actually work around both macOS's and the M1's compatibility issues, this laptop's an easy recommendation for me. That is, as long as you have enough money to spend on a device like this. At $2,700, it's unfortunately the cheapest 16-inch M1 MacBook on the market right now. So you'd kind of be stuck if you absolutely needed macOS on a larger screen laptop. If you don't need macOS though, it might be worthwhile to check out other 15-inch laptops on the market running either Windows or Linux, since they're usually cheaper. If price doesn't dissuade you and you're interested in the very real extra horsepower of M1 chips, be sure to check out our next video, where I'll be describing how well this laptop handles my professional use cases as a data analyst who edits videos. Spoilers, the results are impressive, but also pretty complicated. For now, I'd just like to hear from y'all. Have you gotten some one-on-one time with an M1 laptop yet? What are your thoughts on this new breed of Apple computer? Let me know down in the comments. Also, be sure to click that like button if you did indeed like this video, and hit subscribe to catch the next video. Our videos tend to release every 2 weeks, but come find us on Twitter if you'd like to get extra thoughts on other cool hardware I'm currently testing. Until next time, catch you later.